Friday, December 8th. I'm Phil Franz-Workington. The ICE Futures canola market is stronger Friday morning, seeing a continuation of yesterday's bounce off nearby lows. Canola up $5 to $8, January up 8 at $674.60 per ton. That contract is nearing a technical target at $680, with a move above that level thought to be constructive from a chart standpoint. Gains in outside markets provided spillover support, with Chicago soy oil, European rapeseed, and Malaysian palm oil all moving higher. The U.S. Department of Agriculture will release its monthly supply-demand estimates later this morning, and any surprises in the data will likely set the tone for the grains and oilseeds ahead of the close. In the U.S., soybeans and corn are higher, but wheat is mixed, with positioning ahead of that USDA report a feature. Soybeans up 14 cents in the January contract at $13.26 per bushel. Solid export demand was supportive, with the USDA announcing flash sales of 136,000 tons of soybeans to China this morning. Adjustments to U.S. usage and stocks numbers will be followed closely in today's report, with South American production estimates also at the top of mind for traders. Production prospects are uncertain in South America, given mixed weather forecasts out of Brazil. Corn, it is posting small gains, up a penny in the March contract at $4.89 per bushel. The USDA announced flash sales of 165,000 tons of corn to unknown destinations this morning, providing support. Wheat, meanwhile, is mixed. Minneapolis spring wheat up a penny in the March contract at $7.38 per bushel. Kansas City 4 cents higher in March at $6.72 per bushel. But Chicago soft wheat down 5 cents in the March contract at $6.36 per bushel. The losses in the Chicago contract came despite fresh Chinese buying, with China back in the market, buying U.S. wheat this morning, booking 110,000 tons of soft red winter wheat for delivery during the current marketing year. Traders aren't expecting any major changes in today's wheat numbers from the USDA. Wheat seeding in France is reportedly running behind normal, as rains in October and November caused delays. That's a look at the ICE futures and U.S. markets for Friday, December 8th. In Winnipeg, for MarketsFarm.com, I'm Phil Franz-Workington. That was your Glacier Markets Farm Report.
Equip yourself with the best deals of the year during New Holland's Value Bonanza, going on now at Butler Farm Equipment in Fort St. John. Get 0% financing for 60 months, or choose big cash back on select mid-range tractors, including Workmaster Utility, Power Star, and T5 and TS6 models. Whatever the task, these versatile tractors get the job done. Work smarter with year-end Value Bonanza savings at Butler Farm Equipment in Fort St. John. Stop in today. Offer ends December 31st.
For commercial use only. Customer participation subject to credit qualification and CNH Industrial Capital Canada Ltd approval. Standard terms, conditions, and other restrictions apply. Down payment may be required.
The opinions expressed during this show do not represent those of this station. If you've missed any of this show, you can follow the podcast at Energeticcity.ca. Now, an in-depth look at the news and information shaping our community. This is Moose Talks with your host, Doug Craig, on Moose FM.
Welcome to the show. My first guest today has been the leader of the BC United Party since May of last year, and he's the leader of the official opposition in the BC legislature. Since he became leader, the party's gone through a bit of a name change, and they've been opposing the government, which is what their job is. So to talk a bit about what he wants to accomplish in the piece, and both now and if and when they form government after the next election coming up next year, I'm very pleased to be joined now by Kevin Falcon, the leader of the BC United Party. Kevin, welcome to Moose Talks.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Dub. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. I stumbled through that intro. I'm not sure why, but anyway, we'll just move onward and upward from there. I thought we'd start with this first, Kevin. We have to look a bit at the polling numbers anyway. Initially, it looks like the polling suggests anyway that support is slipping for the BC United Party. Did you expect this sort of thing to happen, given with the name change and trying to sort of, lose the perceived connection you have with the federal Liberal Party, I should say?
Sure. So let's talk about that, because we did as a party make a decision that we were going to change our name from BC Liberals, which important for your listeners to understand that BC Liberals was never connected to the federal party, but it did create voter confusion, and we wanted to eliminate that confusion. And so the party made the decision to change the name to BC United. And the reason we like the BC United name was because we want to unite all those that support a free enterprise system to get together under one umbrella and drive the NDP out of power so we can get back to fixing some of the problems our province faces and get things back on track. Now, I have to tell you that the polls, you have to be very, very careful with polls. First of all, polls today are notoriously inaccurate. They're generally online polls, which means they're a panel of people that they regularly ask for their opinion on different issues, and they can be very, very inaccurate. So I don't, frankly, put a lot of trust in polls. We also know that for whatever value you want to put to them, there's a huge amount of voter confusion, because what happens is people confuse the BC Conservative Party, which is a party that's always been around for decades in BC. It has no connection to the federal party. There's no official connection, similar to when we were BC Liberals. But what happens in the polling is that people confuse the provincial and federal, and they say, oh yeah, Pierre Poilievre, that's who I'm voting for, not realizing that this is provincial politics, not federal politics. And so that creates a huge amount of confusion. And then you couple that with the fact that people are just starting to kind of understand who BC United is. That combination creates the situation you're seeing now. But what I can tell you is I'm not concerned about it very much. And the reason is that we haven't even begun to really start rolling out our advertising and marketing and branding exercise that will let people know who BC United is, what we stand for. We're the former BC Liberals. We're the people that, made the big investments in the province that are so important: LNG, Site C, twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, all these really important decisions. And we want to get back and make sure that we get a government that's thinking about, big projects and getting big things done again. So that's sort of how I look at that. And the other thing I would say is that parties are more than polls. Parties are organizations, they're members. It's about money. We've raised, frankly, we're right behind the NDP in the fundraising sweepstakes, if you will. We're nipping at their heels. We've raised about 76% of what they've raised. The Green Party are way, way down, and the BC Conservatives are, virtually flatlined, which again makes clear that the support they're seeing in the polls isn't translating to people actually supporting them financially. And so I think that also underscores the brand confusion.
I also want to ask you about vote splitting, Kevin. I mean, is that a concern for you at all when people are saying, okay, especially in the Peace, which is arguably one of the most conservative parts of the province, they have a conservative candidate, Conservative United Party, a BC candidate in Dan Davies, and then they may have a Conservative Party of BC candidate as well to choose from. I mean, in general, vote splitting, is that something you're worried about that just delivers another sort of massive election win for the NDP in the coming election?
Well, yeah, I do think voters really have to think about that. I think they have to think about, what's our number one objective here? A lot of the BC Conservatives, I know some of them. Many have known me for many years. They came while I was in the private sector for 10 years. They came on 2 occasions asking me to be their leader. So it's not like, they're an unknown. I've known who they are for many years, and I've always said the same thing to them. You guys, we cannot be splitting votes and allowing the NDP to win. It's just doesn't make any sense. And so I think what the public will ultimately ask themselves, especially as we get closer to the election and the public's actually paying more attention, is they're going to say, who is the team that has the best chance to win and is ready to govern on day one? And I think that's really important. I've been a former deputy premier and finance minister, as a former transportation minister, health minister. I've got experience in the private sector, played a very senior role in the housing sector while I spent 10 years back in the private sector. I've returned to politics, not because I needed the job, frankly, but because I'm doing this for my kids' generation. I've got a grade 8 and grade 5 daughter, and I want to make sure that we get things fixed in this province. We get things back on track, and that we have a premier who is familiar with the Peace, who's been a very big supporter of the major projects that are taking place in the Peace, and will make sure that we, get things going again in this province. And that's myself. And it's not time for, people that have never been elected to anything. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
All right, Kevin. Well, I want to talk about some of the major issues kind of facing the piece that make the news a lot around here. I think first, healthcare and staffing shortages in healthcare. I know this is a province-wide problem, but it seems to be especially a big problem in the piece and in the north. What do you think you and the BC United Party want the government and I mean yourselves, again, if you were to win the next election, to be doing differently to alleviate at least some of the problems in sort of recruiting, retaining staff in hospitals and healthcare centers all over the north and the Peace?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's really important to understand that this is a problem that has really developed over the last 7 years that this government, this NDP government's been in power. It's really important to recognize that because the results they're getting in healthcare are just absolutely atrocious. And you'll hear me often come back to talking about results because this is a government that makes lots of announcements, lots of promises, lots of photo ops. They get everything except results. And the results that they do get are very poor. So we know, just as you point out, 1 in 5 British Columbians do not have access to a family doctor. We've got 1 million people on wait lists trying to see a specialist. Our cancer care has gone from what was once recognized back when I was health minister in 2009, 2010. It was recognized as the best cancer care outcomes in North America, if not the world. And today we've gone from being the best to the worst in the country in terms of the delayed time it takes for people to go get the treatment that they need. And as we know, those delays result in many cases in fatalities because the cancer spread by the time people get the treatment they need. And then you've got this crazy situation where the NDP are literally having to send people to Bellingham, Washington, the United States of all places. This is the same NDP government that often decries the terrible U.S. private healthcare system. And now they're having to send patients down there. And the last time that happened in British Columbia, you have to go all the way back to the 1990s when the NDP were in power in the 90s, and they were having to send patients down to the United States. So this is literally a self-inflicted problem. How do we solve it? Well, first of all, we have to recognize there are literally thousands of doctors, highly trained doctors called international medical graduates, many, if not most of them, by the way, being Canadian kids who have chosen to study abroad, either in Australia, in New Zealand, in the United States, in the Caribbean, wherever the case, Ireland. And they want to come back and practice in British Columbia, but there's so much regulatory red tape nonsense in the way that they're unable to do so. And I've been very clear that as Premier, myself and our BC United government, formerly BC Liberal, will take a chainsaw to those regulations and make sure we open it up and get those young people here in British Columbia helping look after patients. Whether it's in the Peace, the Caribou, the Interior, the Island, the Lower Mainland, I don't care. I want lots of doctors in here, and we can do that.
Well, I mean, you mentioned sort of taking a chainsaw to regulations, but do you also support the idea, I mean, more incentives to get people here, which seems to be something that's happening anyway under the current government, but it isn't working, just the incentives. So I guess you could also answer for me, like some of the regulatory things that you're speaking of that make it so hard. What kind of things would you attack first in that regard?
Sure. So it's important to understand that this isn't a problem that happened overnight. This is a problem that has developed over the last, frankly, 100 years.
Yeah.
We've always done things a certain way when it came to, bringing physicians into our system here in British Columbia. And it's a system that may have made sense 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago. It doesn't make sense in the middle of a crisis. In the middle of a crisis, you have to do things differently. So that means we have to sit down with the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which is now called Doctors of BC. We have to sit down with the medical program at UBC and say to them, listen, we are going to do things differently here. I know we've done it this way for the last 100 years, but we're changing. We're going to change it so that we can get some of these highly trained doctors into our province now and start working together. So that means, for example, that I don't want to get too much into the weeds for you, but typically you have what they call proctors, which are doctors that work with new doctors to help them understand how we do things in a private practice, etc. And typically it's on 1-to-1. Well, in the middle of a crisis, we might have to do 1-to-3 or 1-to-2 or something that says we're going to treat this like a crisis. And it's not the perfect solution, but it starts to get us in the direction of getting people, trained up faster and into the system. I think most people would rather deal with a young, inexperienced doctor that hasn't got, maybe the one-on-one time, but got, two-on-one time with a physician and is now treating them, than have no doctor at all. And so, this is why it's important to move quickly. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that out of this government. Instead, what we're seeing is a growth in the bureaucracy. Adrian Dix keeps talking about all the people they've hired. Well, the problem is they're all administrators, bureaucrats, communications people. They've now got 70 vice presidents, all earning over $250,000 a year, where next door in Alberta, that similar sized population, they have 7. I mean, that's insane. But this is, what you expect with an NDP government. It's just that the problem is we end up getting worse and worse results every time.
I want to talk a bit about crime too, if I could. I know your colleague, Peace River South MLA Mike Bernier, spoke up about what's going on in Dawson Creek in the legislature recently, and we've been seeing it here in Fort St. John too. Though, the RCMP here say a lot of it's more of a perceived increase in crime than an actual. However, I just wanted your take on, whether it's perceived or not, how you handle the situation where it seems like there's a lot more crime happening in the Peace than there was even last year or a couple of years ago or even before the pandemic.
Well, I can tell you that there's just no question everywhere I go in this province. Doesn't matter if it's the island, the lower mainland, the interior, the north, the Peace. I always hear and see about this issue. I have a huge amount of respect for the RCMP. If they say it's just a perception in the Peace, I would certainly want to talk to them about that, because that's a little different than what I hear. But I will tell you that this is directly the result of David Eby. He was the Attorney General for 5.5 years before he became the leader of the NDP party and thus Premier. And while he was Attorney General, he oversaw a soft on crime catch and release program that has just been disastrous for community safety. Essentially, what he's done is he's told the Crown prosecutors to leave the small stuff alone, the assaults, the vandalism, the graffiti, the shoplifting. And it has created chaos. And unfortunately, it's not just the minor crimes. It's people that have very serious crimes and violent crimes that are being released often the same day they're arrested. And you couple that with the reckless decriminalization of hard drugs like heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, fentanyl, and without any restrictions whatsoever. And suddenly we saw an explosion of open drug use in parks and playgrounds and beaches and public spaces. We as an opposition spent 8 months as the official opposition saying, David Eby, for God's sakes, bring in some guardrails to this reckless decriminalization program of yours, because you're destroying communities. And only after, other municipalities started weighing in on this did they finally, reluctantly, bring in a piece of legislation that says you can't openly use drugs. But even that legislation was too weak and didn't go far enough. The bottom line is, this is a government that believes that the solution to an addiction crisis is handing out government-supplied drugs, free drugs for people struggling with addictions. We totally disagree with that. We think the answer is twofold. Number one, we bring back secure forms of housing for people with severe mental health issues. So we get them off the streets into proper care where they can be looked after and get the treatment they deserve and need. And secondly, that we focus on treatment for people struggling with addictions, not just handing them government-supplied drugs, but actually helping them get off of their addiction by getting into treatment programs. Those are big investments, but they're big investments that will have big paydays down the road in terms of less time in front of courts, less policing time having to deal with these folks all the time, less healthcare costs, because these folks are cycling in and out of the system with their repeated overdoses and the accidents and the health issues that they're dealing with by not properly looking after themselves. So there are solutions, but they require a total change in direction, which we will go. The final thing I'll say is we've also said we would fill the 500 vacant policing positions across the province, because it does us no good when the police are short-staffed and haven't got the ability to make sure our streets are safe. And the way you do that is you not only make sure you fund those empty spaces, which the NDP have not been doing, but you also say we will work with local communities to provide extra dollars to provide incentive bonuses to hire people and retention bonuses to make sure they stay on as police officers. So you try to create the right incentive package to draw more people into policing so that we can keep our community safe.
All right, Kevin, I've got just about a minute left, and I want to make sure we talk a bit about infrastructure up in the north here as well. The Taylor Bridge, a very hot topic always around here. And with winter setting in, highways and highway safety has been big up here as well. How important do you think it is to, really move forward on infrastructure funding, especially in places like the Peace, where really there's only one highway to get from Fort Nelson to Fort St. John, for example, and from Fort St. John to Dawson Creek. And a thing like the Taylor Bridge that's 60-something years old now, has needed a replacement for some time.
Absolutely. And so we've already called for that publicly. If you look at our Northern Transportation Policy that I released, it was many months ago, but it called for exactly that. Replacement of the Taylor Bridge was absolutely number one on the list. We need to have more investments in our road infrastructure. I was proud to work with Dick Neufeld back when he was, a local MLA there, and when we were the BC Liberals. We widened the highway through the Peace, right through through downtown Fort St. John, as I recall, and did lots of work with our dusting program to make sure that we deal with dust on the on the secondary roads, etc. So there's a lot more we can do, but I think I just have to say this about infrastructure. Really important for your listeners to know this. The three biggest projects we have going on in British Columbia right now are Site C Dam, the twinning of the Trans Mountain Pipeline to get oil from Alberta into the Lower Mainland, and third is the Coastal Gas Link and LNG program. That combined represents over $70 billion of investment. All three projects were strongly opposed by the NDP government. And if you just think about what our economy would be today if we didn't have those three projects underway, it would be a disaster. In fact, it's made this government look better than they deserve, because none of those projects would have been there. And what I'm concerned about is, as those projects come to an end, which they all are, close to coming to an end, there's not three big major projects behind them, because people are not making big investments in British Columbia anymore, because we've got a government that is hell-bent through their ever-escalating carbon taxes, through their constant punishing of business and free enterprise, of destroying this economy. Their own Clean BC plan, which we call the Cost BC plan, actually, their own numbers say it will shrink the economy by 10% and cause over 200,000 in job losses, and frankly be devastating for the natural resource sector. And I'm not going to let that happen. And I need your listeners to understand that this is an existential crisis for the Peace. If we don't get rid of this government, and if we don't get people in there that know how important the natural resource sector is, that like us are going to scrap provincial fuel taxes immediately, that's 15 cents a liter in savings right there. We're going to say, forget carbon taxes on all home heating fuels, whether natural gas, propane, or oil, because if it's good enough in the East Coast, it ought to be good enough in the West Coast. And we're going to fight David Eby's attempts to continue to increase the carbon tax over the next 6 years, because they're going to triple it. I'm not going to have it. And if Pierre Poilievre, my federal friend, gets elected federally and gets rid of the carbon tax, I can tell you we're getting rid of it in BC too, because we're not going to be the only jurisdiction with a carbon tax in this country.
All right, Kevin. I've got 30 more seconds now for you. I know you're coming to town on the 12th, I believe. You're doing a bit of a town hall. Can you tell us a bit about that quick?
Sure am, yeah. So hosting a town hall with Mike Bernier and Dan Davies. Really looking forward to it. I hope your listeners will get a chance to come out. We're going to talk about all those really important issues like, infrastructure. We want to talk about carbon taxes, talk about SOGI, which is, causing a lot of concerns with folks out there. What's happening in our school system, what happened to letter grades, all these issues that are very, very important. And we want to hear from your listeners. So I'm really looking forward to getting up there with my colleague, Ellis Ross will be joining us. And we're really excited to come and hear from folks and talk to people about our plan for getting the province back on track and fixing a lot of the problems we face.
All right, Kevin. Well, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate you appearing on the show.
Super. Well, really appreciate being on the show, Dub. All the best to you. I look forward to seeing you when I get up there next week.
Absolutely. That's Kevin Falcon, the leader of the BC United Party, and of course the leader of the opposition in the BC legislature. We'll be right back after this on Moose Talks.
Moose FM is out and about, supporting your favorite local business.
How are you doing? My name is Bernard from the Afternoon Show. Hope you're enjoying your Friday. I'm at Straight today on the Old Fort Road, and they're supporting the Salvation Army's toy drive. The Salvation Army, every year, they make sure that every kid here in Fort St. John will have presents during the Christmas time. So lunch is in less than 2 hours. They're firing up the barbecue. So you can grab a burger for free when you drop off and unwrap toys. So pick up a toy during lunchtime and come down here. It's a win-win situation. You get to support a great cause and also fill your bellies up. It's the Toy Drive at Straight today from 11 a.m. till 2 p.m. supporting the Fort St. John Salvation Army.
Who's a good dog?
Bone and Biscuit is open 7 days a week for all your pets' needs. Bring your baby with you and try our treats of the day. This month, Tuesdays between 4 and 9 p.m. is Yappy Hour with double the biscuit bucks. All day Catter Day, double the rewards on cat food, treats, and toys. And of course, the first Wednesday of each month is our Senior Savings Day, where seniors get 10% off store-wide. We are open weekdays until 9 p.m. and weekends 10 to 6 and 10 to 5. Bone and Biscuit, your friendly neighborhood pet store.
This holiday season, CDN Controls and 100.1 Moose FM are spreading the joy. We're giving away $500 every day for 10 days to our local community heroes. Over the past few weeks, you've nominated neighbors, friends, and family members for a moment of light. And now it's time to see who wins. Tune in every morning with Dub and Katarina just after the 8 a.m. news for that day's winner. CDN Controls presents A Moment of Light from December 4th to 15th. Let's make this holiday season unforgettable for someone special.
Are you looking for the right individual to fill your job openings? Become an exhibitor at the Work BC Fort St. John Job Fair, February 8th at the Pomeroy Hotel and Conference Center. This is an opportunity for you to meet talented local people for your company. To become an exhibitor, visit fsjjobfair.ca or call 250-787-7100. The Work BC Fort St. John Job Fair, February 8th at the Pomeroy Hotel and Conference Center.
Our community first. This is Moose Talks with Dub Craig on Moose FM.
My thanks to our guest Kevin Falcon for joining us today. Sadly, our second guest Helen Gilbert had to cancel last minute, but we'll hope to catch up with her and more about the School District 60 strategic plan that they'd like you to be involved in coming up in next week's episode. Now, if you'd like to hear this episode again or on other old episodes of Moose Talks, make sure you check out the Energeticcity.ca podcast page. You'll find past episodes of this show there, along with all episodes of Secrets of the North, Before the Peace, and Voices of the Peace, archived for your listening pleasure. Take some time to listen to some excellent locally produced podcasts today at Energeticcity.ca/podcasts. That's our show. Jordan Prentice and Trey Lopashinsky are the producers of Moose Talks. I'm Dub Craig. Be well.
Join us next Friday at 10 a.m. for another episode of Moose Talks, a weekly talk show about Fort St. John and the North